As we begin this new semester and a new course on world religions, it's important that we begin with definitions. Socrates said a long time ago that when you're studying anything, when you're seeking to know about anything, first define your terms. So, world religions, one of our goals today, define religion. What is a religion? Second, distinguish between religion, philosophy, and science. And finally, describe what should be our approach to other faith traditions, another word for religion. Now, I'm going to start with why I grouped together religion, philosophy, and science. Because at first glance, you might wonder why put those three together. Well, I put those three together because these three domains of study really are trying to explain reality. They're trying to explain life. They're making what we call truth claims. They're all going to try to assert the truth about the world, about our life. They have different methods and they definitely have different standards, but they are all going to try to claim the territory of truth. And that's for that reason they sometimes get into conflict, as we know. And there's an entire course here at Loyola dedicated, some of your classmates are taking it, dedicated to science and religion. Now, for science, the standard is the scientific method. And what is the scientific method? You propose a hypothesis, and you test that hypothesis through collecting data and then measuring it. You measure quantities, you measure that which your senses can perceive, weight, color, etc. You guys have done this in every science course. You know well what the scientific method is. And by collecting that data, you hopefully then can find patterns. That's the goal, to find a universal pattern that always works. And those patterns are usually expressed through mathematical formula. So in physics, you can explain energy, you can explain momentum, you can explain all sorts of reality through mathematical formula. That's how science says reality is explained. And science generally is content to explain the how of the universe. Not my name, of course, but how things work, how the atom works, what a black hole is, how it kind of operates. Now, when we get to philosophy and religion, we also have truth claims being made. And philosophy and religion are alike in several ways. They are alike principally that the questions they're seeking to answer are what we call the big questions. If I remember, that's how we started off our Christology course. The big questions, not so much how does an atom work, but the things that sometimes when we have a moment of quiet sort of come back to haunt us sometimes. What is the meaning of life? Why am I here? What's the point? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is there a God? And if there's a God, how do we relate to this God? What is this God like? What is suffering? Why is there suffering? And especially if you're a Christian, a Jew, or a Muslim, trying to explain if there is a loving God, a just God, which all three of us believe, a loving and a just God, then why is there suffering? If there is a God, how do I relate to that God? Hindus will answer that question differently from Catholics and other religions as well. But philosophy and religion are also trying to answer big questions like what happens after this life? What is happiness? How do we become happy? So philosophy and religion are both trying to answer, again, what we call the big questions, the existential questions. That's something science really doesn't care about usually. It says that's not our business. We don't really care about those things. Not that they're not important, they're just not something science can answer. Now, philosophy literally is defined as the love of wisdom. So wisdom is different from knowledge. Knowledge is the stuff that science and physics, biology, all those sorts of studies can give us. Wisdom is how to navigate life. How do you find meaning and purpose and joy and happiness in this life. And it's that pursuit. And in the Western tradition, in our Greek tradition, philosophy usually tries to stick to that which is logical and reasonable. They try to look at reality and answer the questions of meaning, of God, from the prism, the standard of logic and reason. You may remember that Camus was one philosopher we studied. He was an existentialist. He did not believe in God. At least that's how he answered that question. And if you remember, he said, as I look around at life, as I observe life, it is absurd. It is random. It is chaotic. And it is our job, it is our duty to put meaning into it, to live life in such a way that we find some meaning in it. But there is no inherent meaning in life. Now, when we get to the study of religion, we, again, are looking at those big questions, the questions of God, the question of meaning, the question of happiness, the question of eternity. But we're going to approach it with a different standard, not really logic and reason, although it's not opposed to logic and reason. Let's look at the actual word itself. The word means to yoke together, to bind together. Well, what's being bound together? Well, specifically, it is us and something that is, or someone that is larger than us. We can't always use the word God, because if we use the word God, then we can't count Buddhism as a religion. And there are some people who don't count Buddhism as a religion. They think of it more as a philosophy. But, so it depends on our definition. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to say that that religion yokes us to something or someone beyond us. And so religion is going to have a mystical aspect to it. There's that word again. Mysticism is that communication, that communion between us and the transcendent. For Christians, Muslims, and Jews especially, that transcendent we're going to call God. Jesus had a mystical relationship, communication with God. His experience of God, again, was as compassion, primarily. And because of his experience of God, direct experience, not something up here in his head, his lived experience of God as compassion, we have a religion called Christianity. And we are supposed to be living the Jesus image of God. That's our call as Christians. Jews will have their own. Muslims will have their own. So, religion is going to have a mystical element to it. And we need to understand that if we're going to understand the difference between philosophy and religion. Now, Peter Kreeft, who's a philosopher, philosophy of religion at Boston College, talks about what our approach to other faith traditions should be. And he uses this sort of mystical element to connect us, especially as Christians, to other faith traditions. And he says, we need to use our imagination. We need to use our empathy. Because he says, it's interesting that though the creeds, the statements of beliefs of various religions can be quite different, mystics are often on the same page. It's interesting, for instance, that Merton, you know that word, Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk, got along very well with Buddhist monks. And he found a lot of similarities between Buddhist monasticism and Christian monasticism. And so the mystics seem to be more in touch with this transcendent than sometimes the formal religions are. But if we can use our imagination, if we can tap into that mystical side of us, we hopefully will approach other religions with less judgment and a little more openness. That doesn't mean we're going to accept everything they say or we're going to totally understand it. But as you hear about different practices, rather than perhaps just reacting in a negative way and almost a mocking way because it's different, because it doesn't have our Western sort of sensibility to it, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's different.